A comment came in on the legendary video just a couple of days ago. Somebody laid out their entire argument in just a paragraph. Bullet sponges. What realism actually means when a controller is in your hands. Why the word gets thrown around by people who don't play the genres it applies to. I read it twice, then I read it a third time and realized he had handed me the whole episode. This framing was so concise that I decided this would be the topic for the week. So, wherever you are, Egon, this is that conversation. A few episodes back, I told you about a mountain. Dark Souls. A laptop that wasn't built for it. Garlic spaghetti. A trackpad standing in for a controller. I said the game asked a question. Beat it however you manage. Bows, great swords, magic, or nothing but your own patience. The method was mine to choose. The rules were not. Every game asks that same question and answers it with a different set of terms. All the terms what they actually are. A contract. Trust sits underneath contract, consistency, authenticity, and honesty. It's smaller than all four of them and doing more work than any of them. A designer builds a set of rules and asks you to believe those rules will hold for as long as you're inside of them. Every complaint in this episode, the sponge complaint included, is a complaint about that one relationship breaking. There are 3 layers that make up that trust. Reality is the layer closest to our own. Ballistics, gravity, how a body actually responds to being shot. Believability sits one step removed and asks a gentler question. Does a rule make sense inside the specific world the game already built? Halo's shields don't exist in physics. They exist the moment a title card explains energy barriers and the fiction never once contradicts itself again. Consistency is the layer that actually breaks trust when it fails. Does the game keep doing the thing it already told you it does? A helmet that stops one pistol round and lets the next one through hasn't failed at realism. It failed at keeping its word. Halo honors its contract. Monster Hunter honors its contract more honestly than almost anything else that I will be talking about on this episode. And The Division, we're about to find out, does not always honor its own. A viewer by the name of Drake Warrior Egon Harpooner. That's a good name. You know what, I'm just gonna get this out of the way now because, well, I just have to.
Curse you, Bale! I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true Drake Warrior, and I, Egon. Your fears made flesh. Solid of scale you might be, foul dragon, but I will riddle with holes your rotten hide, with a hail of harpoons, with every last drop of my being.
Anyway. He wanted a whole episode about bullet sponges, about why bullets can't be magic and arrows can't be realistic. Most people using the term online aren't defining it at all, so I'm just going to do that now. When we refer to something as a bullet sponge, it isn't due to high health, it isn't because there's a long time to kill. Monster Hunter has both, and nobody calls it a sponge, because the durability was promised up front, and the fight spends 30 minutes give or take, proving the promise was real. Well, unless you play Monster Hunter Rise or even Wilds, in which case it's probably more fast food gaming than anything. A bullet sponge is narrower and meaner than a raw number. It's an enemy whose durability the game never earned the right to give it. The contract breaking mid-signature. Suspension of disbelief was never me pretending a dragon is real. It's me agreeing to believe a dragon is real because the world already did the work of convincing me it could exist here. That agreement isn't permanent. It renews itself every time the game keeps its word, and it cancels itself the moment the game stops paying for it. We've all been there before. You've played that game where a round travels straight to the target. A good shot, by all accounts, which should be quick and clean, turns into a kerfuffle. Sometimes you have a target and they merely shrug. Sometimes you get a clean headshot only for their helmet to have disagreements. And whether their helmet or armor was made out of vibranium or adamantium, I could never truly figure out which one was stronger. I'm sure regardless, you have scratched your head and simply wondered. That's not how that works, is it? Players say they want realism. I think they're describing something else, and if we're being blunt about it, that mismatch is where most of the discourse around changes to our beloved games actually comes from. Nobody is asking for a Call of Duty where their inventory is capped the way a real rucksack would cap it. Nobody wants to cook a meal mid-firefight. Nobody wants a soldier who gets winded after one flight of stairs. What players want is a game that picks its exceptions and then honors them. Look at how much of a game's reality gets negotiated before you've even fired a single shot. How healing works, whether it's a medkit or a regenerating bar or maybe even a squad mate that patches you up mid-fight. How death works, whether you're the same person waking up at a bonfire or a fresh helldiver dropped from a new pond because the last one already died. Whether you can sprint forever. Whether two sticks somehow becoming a functional sword makes any sense, and whether the game even wants it to. Quest markers floating in three-dimensional space, which only works as a concept if something in the fiction explains why your eyes can even see it. The way Halo's visor gives you an in-universe reason, and Call of Duty simply never even bothers. Experience points, which track cleanly onto a Skyrim character learning a trade, and track onto nothing at all in a soldier climbing an arbitrary rank ladder in, say, Call of Duty. There's also fast travel, sometimes gated behind a cost like Dragon's Dogma's Fairy Stones, sometimes free because the game never even asked the question. The double jump, which Destiny explains by calling you paracausal, and most platformers never explain at all, because nobody asked. Every one of those is a choice. Selective realism. It works exactly as long as it stays selected, and it stops working the moment a game asks you to believe the exception applies everywhere except the one place that's inconvenient for it. Mechanical realism and emotional realism get confused constantly, and they aren't the same axis. Mechanical realism is about whether the systems underneath a game behave the way real systems would. Bullets dropping, armor stopping what it should stop, a body reacting the way a body reacts. Emotional realism is whether a moment feels the way the game promised it would feel, regardless of whether the physics underneath it resembles anything real at all. Doom has almost no mechanical realism anywhere in it. You carry an arsenal no soldier should be able to shoulder. You rip a demon's spine out with your bare hands. You launch yourself across a level on a rocket you fired at your own feet despite how baller that objectively sounds on paper. Nobody has ever accused Doom of lying to them. Every promise the game makes that you are fast, that you are strong, that violence in this world is instant and enormous gets kept in the first 5 minutes and never once contradicted afterward. That's emotional realism running at full strength with mechanical realism taking a backseat. Most games that succeed do exactly that. The ones that fail usually fail because they borrowed the aesthetic of mechanical realism. A man who looks like an actual man, a gun that sounds like an actual gun, and then quietly decline to pay the bill that look sends the player. Gears of War, the OG, General Rom, the final boss, the train car fight. Gears never shows you a health bar on an enemy. You don't get a number counting down, you get animation, you get repetition, you get the accumulating sense that something is or isn't working. That's an honest design choice on its own. A game asking you to read the damage the way you'd read it if it were actually happening in front of you. No HUD holding your hand. Last year, the remaster landed on Steam. I ran it with a buddy of mine and it took us 2 attempts. What took me hours as a kid took only 2 tries as an adult, and I don't really have a clean explanation for the gap beyond dumb luck and the game simply just not working as it intended. I wish I still had the clip, because I streamed the whole run and never saved it. What actually happened, as best as I can describe it, is we took cover right at the start of the fight, and for some reason, Rom just decided not to move. Well, never look a gift horse in the mouth. We hosed him down with everything we had until he fell over. And fall over he did. On Insane, the hardest difficulty the game had until Gears 5 introduced something even worse called Inconceivable. Rom should have had some kind of tell that the fight was turning in my favor. I remember thinking that even as a kid. Most boss fights give you a health bar, even a stylized one. Some visual promise that the number is in fact moving. Gears is a third-person cover shooter. A shooter doesn't strictly need a health bar, but there was nothing else standing in for one either. No overlay, no stagger, no cue telling me the damage was landing. At some point, I genuinely started to wonder if he was immune to something, because nothing on the screen confirmed otherwise. He kept pushing forward and sending the swarm at me, and I had to figure out how to survive that without a single signal I was making progress. Rom wasn't frustrating because he was tanky. He was frustrating because the game never told me tanky was a part of the cards. That's my whole thesis, and just my memory as a kid. A boss fight is supposed to end in triumph. Mine ended in something closer to finally being let out of a room. A breath you let out because something is finally over. Rom's failure and the Division's failure aren't actually the same failure, even though they land in the same place. Rom gave me no feedback at all. I couldn't tell if the fight was moving because nothing on screen was built to tell me. The Division's problem is closer to the opposite. It gives you feedback. It gives you hit markers, damage numbers, all of it, and then asks you to accept something the feedback can't make sense of. An ordinary person absorbing a magazine because a number said so. One game told me nothing. The other told me something and then contradicted its own information with what I was looking at. The Division 2 has spent its entire lifespan fighting this exact complaint. It isn't a fringe read. The game's own creative director addressed it directly when talking about the sequel's combat changes, saying the comments about bullet sponginess weren't unjustified, and that the fix wasn't just fewer bullets. It was giving enemies far more hit animation and visible reaction, so the number underneath stopped being the only thing you could feel. That quote is literally the entire episode. A studio, on the record admitting that a health bar without feedback reads as broken, even when the number behind it was intentional. That's the industry diagnosing itself, not me guessing from the outside. This is the contract breaking in the exact place we already named it. The Division tells you, through its entire aesthetic, that you are shooting people, real streets, real guns modeled off real guns. Then it asks a man in a hoodie to survive punishment no one could ever survive, without changing a single thing about how that person looks while doing so. Halo never makes that mistake because Halo never claimed to be showing you a person in the first place. It showed you a suit of armor and told you the armor was doing the surviving. Fair's fair. We spent 3 chapters spent taking a swing at bullet sponges. I think that earns 2 minutes spent defending them, because the people building these systems aren't doing it out of laziness. Durability has to buy something. That's the actual question sitting under the defense. If I have to put 400 rounds into an enemy, what did those 400 rounds purchase? Well, it could be a longer tactical encounter, multiple phases, a monster changing its behavior mid-fight, resource management, running your ammo dry and having to make a call, positional pressure, build expression, a reason for the character you build to actually matter, visible physical deterioration, escalation, spectacle, 6 people coordinating a raid encounter built around a mechanic that needs 6 people to survive it. If the answer is nothing, the extra health isn't creating gameplay. Multiplayer balance needs durability to function at all. Take the health out of an enemy and I'd wager even the gentleman's pea shooter of a starting pistol becomes the only weapon anybody actually uses, in every mode, in every match, because a headshot that kills through anything stops being a tool and starts being the only decision worth making. Raids need it too. A boss built for 6 people to fight for 15 minutes has to survive 15 minutes of sustained damage from 6 people, or the encounter designer never gets to build the second and third phase that makes the fight worth remembering. Build diversity depends on it more in a direct way than people give it credit for. If every weapon kills in one hit, there's no reason to ever swap builds, and the entire loop that keeps a live service game interesting for months collapses into whichever gun feels fastest. None of that is a design failure. That's the actual math behind a genre that has to keep people engaged for hundreds of hours instead of 6 or 8 a single-player campaign asks for. I don't think bullet sponges are the disease. I think damage inflation is. And bullet sponges are just the symptom that gets noticed first. Diablo is the cleanest example of a game doing this correctly. Your damage climbs from double digits at level 1 into numbers with more zeros than a phone bill by the time you're deep into the endgame season. Enemy health climbs to match it, at the same pace, floor to ceiling. Nothing about the underlying fight has changed, only the numbers did. Players love it anyway, season after season, because the game never hides what's happening. Numbers fly off every hit in enormous colored text. The screen shakes. Enemies stagger, freeze, shatter, ragdoll across the room. You are drowning in feedback the entire time the numbers climb into the millions. None of that means big numbers are inherently good design. Diablo isn't going to be the hero of this chapter because it lets you hit something for millions worth of damage. It's the hero here because it never once pretends those millions are anything other than an abstraction. A scoreboard the entire game is built around. Diablo says the numbers are the game. The Division says these are ordinary people getting shot, and then hands you 2 wildly different mechanical realities running underneath that same sentence. That's the actual comparison worth making here. Not big health versus small health. Not health versus no health. Feedback versus no feedback. Rom had enormous health and told me nothing while he had it. A Diablo boss can carry 40 times more health than Rom ever did and still feel better to fight because it never once stopped talking to you about what's happening. Diablo's absurd health pools buy spectacle and progression. Monster Hunters buys a hunt. A raid bosses buys phases and coordination that 6 people actually need to solve together. Rom's, in my experience, bought nothing but time. People compare games that were never meant to be compared, and to me, most bullet sponge arguments fall apart that very instant. Call of Duty runs on a different contract than Destiny, which has yellow bars, red bars, and an actual boss encounter. Health bars that exist specifically to announce and delineate to the player that this is going to require more than a stern talking to. Destiny sits somewhere between an armored shooter and an RPG, and never fully commits to either side. Borderlands leans further into RPG than Destiny does. Guns with elemental effects and damage numbers flying off every hit because the numbers are the point, not a thing hiding behind the point. Monster Hunter goes furthest of all in one direction. It treats the damage itself as the progression, and nobody who plays it seriously would call a 30-minute hunt a sponge. But it does work both ways. Put an instant headshot kill on a dragon with the standard longbow in the name of realism, and 30 hours of RPG progression math dies in 3 seconds. An arrow can't be realistic in a world built on gear stats the same way a bullet can't be magic in a world built on tactical Kevlar. A complaint that's completely fair inside of Call of Duty is close to nonsense inside an RPG built the other way. The moral here is not that the players are complaining are wrong to want consistency, but it's a different argument. They're applying one game's contract to a different game that never signed it. Ludonarrative dissonance is what happens when what a game tells you through its story contradicts what the game asks you to do with your hands. The word sounds heavier than the idea actually is. It just means the story and the gameplay stopped agreeing with each other somewhere down the stream. Payday is usually the game that I reach for when I try to explain this concept to people. The gang is written as legendary, not immortal. Across a single afternoon of play, that same crew of thieves ends more lives than most fictional militaries manage across an entire campaign. And the game never asks you to feel a single thing about it. No weight, no hesitation, no acknowledgement from Dallas or Chains that the body count behind them might come back to haunt them. The fiction presents this crew as small-time criminals, always one bad job from getting caught. The gameplay presents them as functionally superhuman, able to walk through a police response that would end most real crews in the first 10 seconds. Both of these can't be true about the same crew, and the game asks you to believe both anyway. That's the same broken contract we've been tracing through health bars, just filed under narrative instead of mechanics. The story promised you a rule about who this character is. The gameplay broke that rule in the first firefight and kept breaking it for the rest of the game. Nobody in the credits sat down and decided to lie to the audience. The writing team and the combat team were answering two different questions, and nobody in the building reconciled the answers before the game ever shipped. Intravenous' two leads, Sean and Steve, don't have this problem. Neither of them is written as invincible, and neither of them plays as invincible either. The story's stakes and the gunfight stakes are telling you the same thing at the same volume, which is a smaller kind of honesty than most AAA games manage to hold for an entire runtime. If I see a human being, I expect them to die quickly. Aside from you, of course, dear viewer. If I see a monster, I'm willing to grant it a little bit more. A robot earns a little more leeway again. A dragon, more still. And then a game hands you an ordinary-looking man in a hoodie who absorbs an entire magazine, and something in you rebels before you've even thought about why. That's not irrational. It's the same contract logic running underneath everything I've been talking about so far. Visual design is a promise, and a durability number that ignores the promise is the rule breaking itself in front of you. Let's picture two bosses for a moment, both sitting at 100,000 hit points. On the first, armor cracks. As the fight goes on, pieces start falling away. The creature slows down, it starts limping, and the music shifts to sit inside that. You feel every stage of the fight ending one piece at a time. On the second, nothing changes. The bar barely moves, and somewhere in the fight, it flips briefly, invulnerable, so the room doesn't delete it by accident. Same number, completely different experience. Monster Hunter is the clean example of the first version. You cut off a tail mid-hunt and it may take an ability away from the monster along with it. It might make it limp, it makes it flee when it's actually losing rather than just a scripted thing it has to do. Strategic dismemberment isn't an occasional flourish here, it's the entire combat system. Necromorphs don't go down from a chest full of bullets. They go down from losing the specific limbs that let them move and attack, and the game shows you exactly what a shot did the instant it lands. An arm gone, a leg dragging, a creature crawling because it has nothing left to run on. You're never once left guessing whether the fight is going anywhere because the necromorph is missing pieces in real time and adjusting its attacks to match with what's left of it. HP alone was never the problem. The problem here is that a design that doesn't bother building the feedback that would have made the same number feel earned. id Software calls their version of this destructible demons. On its third iteration, by their own account, sharper with every entry from 2016 through Eternal into the Dark Ages, where a demon can now lose a limb outright and keep fighting you with whatever it has left. That's not incidental gore, that's the same durability feedback Monster Hunter and Dead Space are running, dressed up as violence for its own sake. Doom never once pretends to be showing you something real, and nobody has ever accused it of lying. A man in a hoodie who eats a full magazine and keeps walking does the opposite. Looks like something that should exist in the actual world, and behaves like nothing that could. Here's a thought experiment for you, dear viewer. Strip the shields out of Halo entirely. one assault rifle burst will kill the Master Chief the way a burst would kill anybody that would be standing in the open. That's more realistic by any definition that matters to the word. It would also make for a genuinely terrible Halo, and every one of us would feel the difference in the first 30 seconds without needing a word for it. Games don't need to be realistic. They need to be honest. They need to teach you the rule and then keep it, and if they do that, I will believe in energy shields and demons from hell without a single complaint. ROM taught me nothing on that train car, except that patience outlasts feedback. The moment you break your own rule, and even a man surviving 3 pistol rounds starts to feel like a lie. I am Agis. Thanks for watching. Hello everybody. I would like to thank each and every one of you for tuning in this week. By the time this gets recorded, I believe we would have reached or are reaching 200 subscribers. I say this like a broken record, but I mean it every time. I'm so incredibly grateful that people actually care for the subject matter, and it's surprising me for some reason each time it happens, where I see a comment that actually engages with the episode, or somebody that actually puts out a thought or a critique. When I started this, the idea was to make sure that conversations keep happening, not to stop them. I look at content creators, and I don't mean to be one of those in the space that calls others out. It's their craft, it's how they do things, and how I do something is going to be different to how they do things. But I look at folks like Young Yeah and Legendary Drops and the Act Man, people who give you their verdict. They tell you how they feel it is. For me, I want to make sure that people don't just say, oh, well, this is bad because Agis said so. No, I want people to be able to talk about it. I want to be able to see conversations happening within games media that isn't just be mad because I read this out to you and therefore that just makes the most sense. This is the first time a viewer had prompted me with an episode. I hope it landed the way that Egon wanted it to. And if it hadn't, well, there's always next time. There are still plenty more conversations to have. But until then, all I can tell you is thanks for watching.